So, Wake Forest was founded in 1834 as a manual labor institute. In 1946, the school, after having been in session for more than 100 years, accepted an invitation from Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation to move from Wake Forest, North Carolina to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. This is frustrating, and it's interesting to me that they didn't change the name because it's kind of annoying that Wake Forest, North Carolina exists and Wake Forest University is somewhere else. But, anyways, so this campus, the Rinaldi campus, opened its doors in 1956. Um, so, it was a university only in 1967. Up until that point, it was a college. And so, because it was a college for the entirety of its time in the Wake Forest campus, that's actually an interesting change that was made. So, when you think of non-changes, consistent things that came from the original campus, the first thing I thought of was some of the names. So, the two names that I noticed stuck with the school after it moved were Wingate and Bostwick. Bostwick takes its name from Jabez Abel Bostwick. I probably butchered that name, but he was a New York City benefactor, and he is known as the father of the Wake Forest Endowment. He actually worked with the Rockefellers, which is really cool. I'm sure everyone's heard of them. So he was the treasurer of the Standard Oil Trust, which was the big monopoly that got broken up. And he was CEO of several major railroads in the Northeast. Which is why the Bostwick Residence Hall actually has a train on its crest, which I think was really cool to learn. Because all the freshman residence halls have their own little crest thing, and yeah, I never knew why Bostwick was a train. But anyways, so it's interesting to speculate what will happen to his legacy, Bostwick's legacy, if the outdated dorm is demolished or in some other way substantially altered. Because, I mean, it would take a lot of funding to rebuild, to make a new residence hall, and which they really should do. And the question is, would it be renamed Bostwick, or would it have some new name from some new person who provided the money? And it's interesting to think about that, in my opinion. So Wingate is the other name, as I mentioned. And Wingate, there's a road called Wingate in the original campus, and there's a building and a road called Wingate on the current campus. So Wingate is named after Washington Manly Wingate, who was the fourth president of Wake Forest, and he served from 1853 to 1862, and then after the Civil War from 1866 until his death in 1879. Wingate contributed to the success of Wake Forest, but he also promoted the institution of slavery. Recently, the Board of Trustees for the university has decided to rename Wingate Hall. This demonstrates a shift in priorities in the Wake Forest community as the narrative surrounding Antebellum South shifts in universities nationwide. So the transitioning of these names represents an appreciation. The transferring of these names, represents an appreciation for the old place and a desire to recreate it in a new environment. But as conditions and conversations are dynamic, these names may fade into the past as a new place continues to emerge here in Winston-Salem. The death of Wingate's legacy is only a small part of Wake Forest's continued evolution as time persists. The thing that is probably least likely to change as time passes is the architecture on campus. The majority of the buildings on the new campus are done as a modified Georgian architecture and constructed of old Virginia brick trimmed in granite and limestone, which I think looked really nice, truthfully. They are also connected by classical brick paths and and clustered around elegant quads. All of these stylistic choices are a direct reference to the original campus. This was obvious on my virtual trip to the old campus using Google Maps and Street View. I mean, the resemblance is uncanny. It's almost identical in certain ways. Like, you'd think you're at Wake Forest, because it once was Wake Forest. The structure I wanted to focus on is the arch, as it represents one of the most direct links between the old campus and the new one. I realize this choice is unorthodox, as the arch is not really a building, but it is one of the most interacted with pieces of architecture on campus. The arch that sits on the quad today is a replica of the original, which can still be found on our old campus in Wake Forest. Moving the original arch was initially considered, but the idea was eventually abandoned. This potential decision was actually really interesting because it represents a serious, unrealistic effort to move the past to the present. Each year during commencement, the graduating class enters the quad through the arch. It is one of the oldest traditions the school has, and it directly relates to the recreation of a place. One of the few differences between the two is that the original arch says Wake Forest College, while the new arch says Wake Forest University. This shows that the tradition does not wholly supersede change, even in such symbolic feature. Um, because they could have kept it the same if they're going to do a total replica, but clearly they thought it was important to not do that. And it's impossible to talk about recreating the aesthetic of the old campus without mentioning the magnolias. The magnolias today come from the seeds that were collected from the old campus in 1947. They are the direct descendants of those that line the quad of the old campus. The DNA within them is a measurable scientific testament to the connected nature of the two places, which I think is really cool. It shows that it's not just like a spiritual or emotional tradition thing, it's an actual biological connection. So when comparing the maps, a few things jump out to me right away. The first is the lack of color between the man-made features in SBTS map. The WFU, oh my gosh, the WFU map is full of green, and even labels many of the fields. This may stem from the power and significance that fields have in the WFU community. Wake Forest is a school with D1 sports, and so marking fields is just something that most people in the Wake Forest community would do if told to create a map. Physical activities are simply an integral part of the Wake Forest taskscape. Another weird one is the way parking is handled. The WFU map makes a distinction between guest parking and normal parking, while the SBTS map seems to place extreme importance on where to park. It's a strange, there's plenty of different people who can park where and when at Wake, but it seems to be nowhere near as important. It's also interesting that the SDPBS map has several unlabeled structures, which is not really the case at Wake. One thing I noticed when looking at the WFU map is that it has a second map in its corner. I've looked at this map like 100 times, and I never noticed that before, which is strange. This shows that the campus. This shows the campus in the context of the community, as the community meaning Winston-Salem, something that the SBTS map makes no effort to do. I think that's interesting because Wake Forest is named after a freaking different city, and yet it's being linked intensely to the new city that it moved to. So, all in all, pretty interesting assignment, and yeah, very cool. It's cool to learn about all this stuff. I knew very little about the old campus.